I wanted to have the pleasure here this evening of speaking with Professor Dershowitz and with Bernie Marcus and hearing their opinions on what's going on here on the campuses. And I wanted to start off with a question to Alan that just kind of understanding the characterization of this issue. You know, we see that this is an issue. Some people say perhaps we're exaggerating the problem. How do you understand the nature of this problem and how serious it is facing the Jewish people today?
Well, first, thank you, and thank you for this spectacular film. It really encapsulates and captures what I see every day when I speak on college campuses, not only in the United States, but around the world. Today is a very special day in America, Martin Luther King's birthday, and I'll never forget Martin Luther King coming to Harvard University when I was a junior professor and expressing his Zionism and his firm belief that when you talk anti-Zionism, you're talking anti-Semitism. And this is from the leader of the civil rights movement in America. I want to begin by pointing out one group of people that you didn't see in this film. You saw anti-Israel professors, many of them. You saw anti-Israel students. You saw pro-Israel students. You did not see pro-Israel professors. And let me tell you why that's so serious. Every major university has pro-Israel professors. And with a few exceptions, they are absolute cowards. Let me tell you how I know that. Whenever I speak on university campuses, and I speak all over, I get a phone call that afternoon or the next day from 4 or 5 professors at the university. And the phone call goes like this: thank you, Alan, in a whisper, for speaking out on Israel's behalf. And I say, the reason I was invited is because you won't speak out on Israel's behalf. Why are you silent? You speak out in your synagogue, you speak out in your country club, you contribute to the UJA, you contribute to the JNF. Why are you silent? Why, when Columbia University wants a pro-Israel speaker, they have to go to Harvard? Why, when Yale wants a pro-Israel speaker, they have to ask me? Why, when Michigan wants a pro-Israel professor, I'm the only one there? Erwin Cutler, Elie Wiesel, who's now getting old, but I'm the one who gets called on. Because I have to tell you, in 50 years of teaching at Harvard, at Stanford, at NYU, at Yale, I have never met a less courageous group of people than pro-Israel professors with tenure. They are gutless, they have no courage, they do not use their tenure. Why? Let me tell you why. Because they get punished. Their student evaluations go down. Story that happened to me. When I started speaking on behalf of Israel, I was the top-ranked teacher at Harvard Law School. My evaluations were always #1. When I started teaching, never teach about Israel, it's outside the classroom. The classroom is sacrosanct. One must be totally objective. But when I started speaking and becoming identified with pro-Israel attitudes, the student evaluations went down dramatically. What happens is the group of radical students would get together. You get ranked from 1 to 5. And about 20 of my 100 students would give me 0, 0, 0 on everything. On my teaching skills, on my knowledge of the subject. And the dean called me in one day and said, I see what's going on. I said, why do you see what's going on? He said, I looked at your evaluations, and you get a 0 for accessibility outside of class. And everybody knew I was the most accessible professor. I took every student to lunch. Every student was invited to our home for dinner. My wife is here with us tonight. She took the burden mostly of that, but we had every student for dinner. We had students over the house for our Passover Seder, for our Yom Kippur breakfast. So I was the most accessible professor to students, and I got a 0, 0, 0, 0 for accessibility outside the classroom, and that became very clear what was going on. I was being punished for my pro-Israel advocacy. I was excluded from the American Academy of Arts and Sciences because of my pro-Israel advocacy. I was denied, believe it or not, an honorary degree at Brandeis University. The president of Brandeis called me and said,
Say his name. What is his name?
Yehuda Reinhardt.
He's out. That's your life.
No, let me tell you what happened. He called me and he asked, no, it's the opposite. Well, he called me and he asked me, would you be willing to accept an honorary degree from Brandeis? And I said, of course, it would be my great honor. Called me about 2 weeks later, and he said, Alan, I just can't do it. Graduations are about the students, not about protests. And I was told that if you got an honorary doctorate, Professor Gordy Feldman, Jewish professor, would lead a campaign against you and there'd be demonstrations. And so I don't care. I have more honorary degrees than I can hang on my wall. Do I care if I'm in the American Academy of Arts and Sciences or if my student evaluations go down? But imagine an assistant professor or an associate professor seeking tenure who wants to speak out for Israel. They're terrified. They just won't do it. And that's why the students have been so brave and so strong. And that's why organizations like Jerusalem U stand with us, Camera on Campus, all of these great grassroots organizations are so necessary on campus because the students have no faculty support. You occasionally get a strong voice, Larry Summers. What do you call a president of a university who was strongly pro-Israel? You call him an ex-president of the university. He lost his job in large part because of his pro-Israel attitude. That sends a message to people all over. And so that's why we need you. What I tell when I speak on college campuses, I look at the students and I say, you are not the university. I look at the faculty and say, you are not the university. You're temporary people here. The university is a community, and it includes alumni, and it includes donors, and it includes outside people. And we have to get together and use every resource available to us. I'll just make a couple of more points. Let me tell you what happened a few years ago when they tried to invoke an academic boycott against Israeli professors. I called my friend Steve Weinberg, who won the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1977, I think, and I said, we have to do something about this. You and I both have doctorates from Israeli universities that they want to boycott. Why don't we write a letter? And he asked me to draft it, and I did. And the letter said, we are Israeli professors for purposes of any boycott. If you boycott Israeli professors, you boycott us. So the two of us signed it. We sent it to 100 or 200 of our friends, and we asked them to circulate it around. By the end of a month, we had 11,000 American university professors who were willing to say, we are Israelis for purposes of any boycott. And that's an extreme situation. And mostly they were very, very senior professors. We also got 200 presidents of universities to do that. By the way, that was 10 years ago. I don't know whether that would happen today. I don't know whether we get 11,000 professors being willing to sign on to say we are Israeli professors for purposes of any boycott. My point is we need your help. If you're a graduate of Harvard, you're as much Harvard as any professor and any student. If you're a graduate of Michigan, if you're a graduate of Tufts, if you're a graduate of Emory, you are part of the university community. Do not let this temporary group of professors and students destroy what universities have spent centuries building up. Academic integrity, academic freedom, the freedom of expression. Because what we're seeing on college campuses today is the death of academic freedom, the death of free speech. When I spoke at Johns Hopkins a month ago, I was accused, before I said a word, I was accused of harassing the students. Why? Because I wouldn't publicly acknowledge that Israel was a war criminal state. That is, my silence constituted harassment. And the students stood up and walked out of my speech saying I was denying them a safe space because I was supporting a country that was war criminal. They don't care. And then they painted a Hitler mustache on my picture, and also, they were threatening. I had to have armed guards. Whenever I speak on university campuses, I need armed guards to protect me because there are threats to my life, there are threats to my physical safety. And these are the students that have the chutzpah, the nerve, to say, we want safe spaces for our ideas. We don't want microaggressions. We don't want people challenging our ideas. Mommy, Daddy, Dean, protect us from dangerous ideas. If you want to be protected from dangerous ideas, don't go to college. If you want to be protected from physical intimidation, you have the right to demand that the university give you that protection. So we have a real battle on our hands. And organizations like Jerusalem U are doing a great job making the case that professors are generally afraid to make. So we really need your support, and I thank you for it.
I would like to add to that. I think when you look at this situation, I really blame the Jews in the United States for what's happening. If you look at every major university, let's go to the University of Michigan, let's take UC Irvine, which is a bed of anti-Semitism. If you think Michigan is bad, you have no idea how UC Irvine is. It's dangerous for Jewish students. You have any idea of how many Jews have given UC Irvine hundreds of millions of dollars? I know several of them. I know one that's given $100 million to this university. And so I say, I mean, where don't you have a clue that you're developing a university where your kids, your grandchildren, are not going to be allowed to go and speak openly and speak freely? And do you not understand it? Well, I didn't give the money for that. I built a medical thing. It was medical. It had nothing to do with anti-Israel. The brains are just unbelievable. How people don't understand that. That's number one. Number two, yeah, Jews are responsible. You have how many people in this room? About 400 people, maybe, something like that? You all have grandchildren who are going to universities. How much time do you spend with them talking about this issue on campuses? If you did, you'd find out that they are intimidated and that they need your support to know how to fight this. And they need to have the backbone. They're frightened to death. This young girl is beyond belief, the one in Michigan. I mean, she is unique and unusual, both the young girl and the young man. You don't see that on universities today. It's very, very tough. It takes numbers to give you strength. When you stand by yourself, you don't. So I think that the parents and the grandparents have a role in this. Alan, I really do. My grandkids know where they stand. They understand Israel. They've been there many times. They understand what this country. I have two that live there and made Aliyah. So my kids understand it. What you have to do is a better job with the children that you have in your families, because that's the way. I mean, every one of you go to every one of these organizations that you speak to, Alan, you have to address that issue. It's the people in this room and every room out there that allows this to happen and doesn't do anything about it.
I agree. And don't be embarrassed. Don't be embarrassed about using your financial resources in the interests of morality. You mentioned Irvine. I just wanted to make one point about Irvine. So I spoke at Irvine, sponsored by Stand With Us, a year before the famous event with the Ambassador Orrin. And they tried to shout me down, the same thing. They had the same students trying to shout me down. I'm just rude and have a very loud voice. I come from Brooklyn. Nobody is shouting me down. So I just persisted and kept speaking. And let me tell you how the debate went. There were about 1,000 students there. About 100 on this side I could see wearing kippot, the blue and white, and the Israeli flag. And about 100 on that side wearing the green and the Palestinian symbols. And I started, before I'd start my speech, I said, I want to ask one question to each group. I want to first turn to the pro-Israel group and ask how many of you would be willing to accept a peaceful, non-terrorist Palestinian state, disarmed to be sure, with security for Israel, but a state of Palestinians. Every single hand went up immediately. Every single hand. I then turned to the Palestinian group and said, how many of you are prepared to accept a non-expansionist, without settlements, Jewish state living next to you in peace? They mumbled among themselves, they talked. Not a single hand went up. The provost of the university came up and whispered and said, Alan, sit down, you've won the debate. Because I wasn't aiming to convert them, certainly didn't need to convert them. I was aiming for the 800 people in the middle who came with open minds. Why do I get such big crowds at universities? They think I'm going to tell them whether OJ did it. They come to hear me talk about civil liberties, about my criminal clients, but you'll find out. There's a TV show about it soon. You'll find out.
He's innocent, I'm telling you.
I'll tell you a funny. You got a minute for a funny story? Bibi Netanyahu gets elected prime minister. I've known him since he's 23 years old. He invites me, my wife, and my daughter to see him. This is the first time. Just elected a week. Invites us to the office, and we take some pictures. We schmooze, and he says, "Alan, I need to talk to you about something very, very secret." He takes me into his inner office, which is debugged, and he says, "Alan, so did OJ do it?" And I said, "Mr. Prime Minister, does Israel have nuclear weapons?" He said, "Well, you know I can't tell you that." I said, "You know I can't tell you that." But the point is that, and this is the good news, this is the good news, and this is why this is so important. On every university campus, there are very loud, very raucous, and sometimes very violent anti-Israel groups. By the way, they're not pro-Palestinian. They're not interested in the welfare of the Palestinian people. If they were, they'd be interested in making peace, a two-state solution. They're not pro-Palestinian, they're anti-Israel. There's a group of anti-Israel people on every campus. There's a group of pro-Israel people on every campus. And then there's a group of people with open minds, sometimes hollow minds, sometimes minds that don't care about this, but the vast majority of students on university campuses do not have strong views about Israel. And those are the target students. Those are the ones we have to persuade. They are the future leaders of America. They are the future voters. They are the future business people. They are the future newspaper editors. And that's why we can never give up on the students, because I think we can win this battle. I'll give you one more example, and then we'll move on.
So move on. It's not easy.
Okay, one more example. So, for years, I've been invited to debate at the Oxford Union. And I've always turned it down because I was told you cannot win a debate on Israel at the Oxford Union. For example, one debate they wanted me to have was, is Israel worse than Hamas? I'm not going to debate that issue. Finally this year, they said they want me to debate Barghouti, the head of the BDS movement, on BDS. That was a very important reason I did it. Another very important reason I did it is my granddaughter, who just graduated Harvard last year, is now a student at Oxford studying stem cell regenerative neurobiology. I don't understand a word of it. But she's there as a student. So I said, yes, I will do the debate. I will debate Barghouti. They call me back and they say, Barghouti won't debate you. You're part of the boycott. You're an Israeli academic. He won't debate you. You're being boycotted. We have a woman. She'll debate you. She's like second or third interested in this. I get a call a week before the debate. She won't debate you. They have decided you are unworthy of being a debate partner. Finally, they got a very distinguished, you can watch it on YouTube. If you just do Dershowitz, Oxford, BDS movement, you get it on YouTube. Debated a guy named Peter Tatchell, who's a very prominent gay activist and anti-Israel and human rights activist. And we ended up winning the debate, and winning it quite overwhelmingly, because we were able to prove to students with an open mind that BDS is not consistent with peace, that it undercuts peace, that it undercuts the two-state solution, that everything they want is not what the BDS movement wants. And I think we can win these debates. I think we can win debates on American college campuses. And I think a lot of these organizations that I speak so fondly about are doing a great job in shifting the rhetoric. And you shouldn't only listen to the loudest voices, listen to the dominant voices.
I have an issue with colleges. Political correctness is about, well, it's exactly what happened to you, isn't it? Same thing. Political correctness is probably one of the most destructive things that happened to our universities in God knows how many years. It's taking us back to the Stone Ages. If what's happening to the Jewish students on campus ever happened to black students on campus, what would happen, Alan?
Well, we already see that. If you do anything, if you suggest as a dean at Yale that maybe students should be free to pick their Halloween costumes, you lose your job, because that's regarded as insensitive. My grandson, who's also a student at Harvard and one of the editors of the Lampoon, went to a Harvard-Yale football game. And you've heard of the term microaggression. That's a term that's used now by minority students when professors say anything critical, it's a microaggression. And so my grandson and his friend from the Harvard Lampoon put up a funny sign at the Yale-Harvard game saying tackling is a microaggression. And boy, did they get it. Students came over and called them racist, called them bigots, said you should be disciplined, you should have to go to sensitivity training. Does anybody here know the origin of the term political correctness? Very interesting. It's a term that grows out of the Communist Party of the 1930s. The Communist Party had rules about what was politically correct speech and what was politically incorrect speech. And you could be thrown out of the Communist Party if you were politically incorrect. And it's so interesting that we hear that term thrown about today, and very few people know its insidious origin as part of an effort to suppress free speech and criticism.
Yeah, but you know, Alan, there's the Jews are considered to be a minority. There was a rule passed, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah.
Why isn't the Justice Department acting on this? Why are they allowing this to happen on campuses? What is it, Section 6, what is this, where the Title 6?
Yeah.
Title 6,
Yeah.
where how much funding goes to Harvard, goes to Yale, goes to every university in the United States.
Yeah.
Millions of dollars to every one of these schools, and if they don't abide by the rules. So how does it happen that they allow this to happen? Is it because of the administration that we have now? Is it because of the Attorney General that we have now? Is that why it's happening, or is there something I don't know about?
Well, I know that there are efforts now to get the Justice Department involved in looking at harassment of pro-Israel students on campus. I hope it will bear some fruit. Clearly, there is harassment that's going on college campuses today, and clearly there's a double standard that applies.
I just want to try to get a word in edgewise. I'm Canadian. I don't have a chance against Brooklyn.
Or Newark.
Although I've been, or where?
Newark.
Yeah, no chance. And although I've been in Israel for 30 years, I still haven't developed that chutzpah quite the same level.
No, you haven't. You're in Israel for 30 years. You got the things, but don't worry about it.
I just wanted first, I'm going to throw out another question, but just to fill out a little bit more of just understanding quite how difficult it is for young Jewish students today. Brandeis University did a study on anti-Semitism on the college campuses, perceptions and realities. It's available online. More than 25% of undergraduate students describe hostility towards Israel on campus by their peers as a fairly big problem or a very big problem. And nearly 15% perceive the same level of hostility towards Jews. Nearly 1/4 report having been blamed during the past year for the actions of Israel because they were Jewish. About 1/3 of college undergraduates report having been verbally harassed during the past year because they were Jewish. And nearly 3/4 of respondents report that they've been exposed at one time during the past year to at least one of 6 anti-Semitic statements. Now, when you think about it, it's remarkable that there is that level of hostility that these young Jews are facing, and we're talking about the campus issue, but I would like to throw out the question of, is this restricted to just campus? Is this only a campus issue?
Well, I think it's starting on the campuses, and campuses are a microcosm of America. What happens on a campus ultimately moves to the mainstream, and I think that's why it's so important to focus on what's going on campuses. Look, in my experience, certainly at Harvard, there was no overt anti-Semitism. You could wear a kippah, you could wear a Magen David, you could walk around the campus. But when you are seen as pro-Israel, then it begins. Then your kippah becomes not a symbol of your private religion, but it becomes a symbol of your Zionism. I don't wear a kippah, but I wear a kippah in one country in the world, and it's not Israel, it's France. When I go to Paris, I wear a kippah. When I spoke at the National Assembly, invited by the National Assembly a couple of years ago, I wore a kippah. When I spoke at human rights events, I wear a kippah because I just want to show that I'm not fearful. There was a big debate in Paris just last week. There was an attempt to have everybody in Paris wear a kippah last Friday, just to show symbolism. Some Jews didn't like that. They said the kippah, it didn't go too effectively. Some in the Jewish community said the kippah is a religious symbol, it shouldn't be used as a political symbol. you know, you get 2 Jews, you get 3 opinions. So you're not going to get any consensus. But I would say today in the United States, it is not dangerous to have a name like Cohn or Goldberg or Schwartz or Bernstein on a college campus. It becomes dangerous only if you're perceived as pro-Israel. And being pro-Israel has become the litmus test. If you want to join the left, if you want to be accepted by the hard left, if you want to be accepted by radicals, then you have to prove it if you're Jewish by showing you're more anti-Israel even than your Gentile colleagues. That's the test. And if you want to pass it, and you want to be widely accepted in your community, you have to do that. That's true in faculties as well. You want to go to dinner parties and be accepted, you don't have to be virulently anti-Israel, but if you're pro-Israel, I mean, I have a reputation on the campus that, you know, I'm pro-Israel, and that makes me kind of unacceptable socially in some milieus. I have other professors, friends, who are just as pro-Israel, but quietly pro-Israel, and it doesn't affect them at all. So it's a subtle thing, but subtleties begin to merge into less than subtleties, as we see in this film. In some campuses, it's very overt. I haven't seen that yet. The overt anti-Semitism, certainly not at the campuses I'm familiar with. Yes, in Irvine. Yes, at some San Francisco universities and in a few other places. But the students are the ones who are really fighting back. They deserve the credit. They are courageous. I had a student a few years ago. This is a great story. So, a professor at Harvard named Duncan Kennedy, who was a radical leftist and a total and complete ignoramus when it comes to the Middle East or Israel, is my colleague. Not the only ignoramus, but uniquely ignorant. Don't think he had ever been there, but he's a hard leftist. And if you're a hard leftist, you have to teach a course against Israel. And so this is a guy who teaches contracts. He volunteered to teach a course on human rights in Israel. So one of my student research assistants named Joel Pollack, you may know his name. He's now one of the runs Breitbart publications. He decided to take the class. And so he read the syllabus, and he went over to Professor Kennedy, and he said, Professor Kennedy, I've read the syllabus in this class, and it's not a class. It's an exercise in propaganda. It's all one-sided. There are no pro-Israel. Why don't you at least assign some balancing articles or books? And Professor Kennedy said, this is my class, I'll teach it the way I want it. And Joel looked him in the eye and said, Professor, this is not your class. This is our class. And I'm going to do a website in which for every one of the anti-Israel articles you assign, I'm going to assign a pro-Israel article, or an article at least that strikes a balance. Students are entitled to read those articles. They say, yeah, but I'm going to grade them on my articles. I said, that doesn't matter. The students are not here for grades. They're here to learn. And Joel put a syllabus online, and more students were reading his things than were reading Professor Kennedy's. Now, Joel probably got, he never told me, he probably got a C in class, but he didn't care. He didn't care. He was interested in truth. He fought back, and he was courageous. Would a professor be as courageous? I don't know.
He is rare. Let me ask you a question, Alan. This is really the UN Human Rights Committee, which is made up of great human rights. Iran is in charge of the human rights of women. I mean, you look at every country that's there. Has passed the resolution 1618. You know all about it. I doubt that anybody here knows about it. This was really passed, I believe, to stop Islamophobia in the world, especially in the United States. And it basically is all conclusive, and by the way, inclusive, and by the way, the US government supported that resolution.
To its disgrace.
To its absolute disgusting disgrace.
Yeah.
Those of you ought to understand this out here. This actually takes away the power of the FBI to really investigate Muslims. And this is all about Islamophobia. Now, this is passed by an organization, and by the way, Saudi Arabia signed on to it. I'd like to see you wear a kippah in Saudi Arabia. or wear a going with the Old Testament.
Or a cross.
Yeah. So that is what they call, where I come from in Newark, total bullshit. And we signed on to it. Our country signed on to it. That is disgusting, and it sets a pattern. Now I'm going to ask you the question. Now, there are provisions in this thing that actually interfere with free speech, First Amendment, and go against the First Amendment. What is this administration going to do about that? They passed it, they supported it, what are they going to do about it? In other words, there are provisions there that say you cannot, that if I decide, this is like political correctness on campus, if I decide that it offends me, you can't say it and I can sue you for it. I don't know.
It wouldn't hold up in an American court.
Why do we sign on for it?
Well, the argument that's been made is it was heuristic. It was just symbolic that we went along with everybody in the world trying to counter Islamophobia. The provision was very badly drafted. I think some of our Justice Department lawyers had questions about its constitutionality. And believe me, if it ever comes up in a case, I will take that case and challenge it on First Amendment.
I'm going to pay for your service.
You don't have to pay. I'll do it free. Believe me, this is something that comes out of my heart. Let me give you the worst example of a double standard, though. Okay, what country in the Middle East is the best country on gay rights? It's not even a close question. Israel is the only country in the Middle East that supports gay rights. Israel is the only country in the Middle East that has had gay generals, gay members of the Knesset, gay members of the judiciary, of course many gay professors. They allowed gays in the military when the United States still had don't ask, don't tell. Okay, so the New York Times publishes a piece about 2 years ago called Pinkwashing. And it's done by a gay woman, Jewish professor at Staten Island College in New York. And here's her thesis. She says, let's start out with a fact. Israel is the best country in the Middle East when it comes to gay rights. It's one of the best countries in the world when it comes to gay rights. But the only reason it does it is to pinkwash what it does to the Palestinians. That is, whitewash what it does to the Palestinians. So when Israel does good, it's turned against them. When Israel does bad, it's turned against them. When Israel does nothing, it's turned against them. That is the essence of anti-Semitism. The classic definition of anti-Semitism are Jews are too rich, Jews are too poor. Jews are too capitalist, Jews are too communist. Jews are too religious, Jews are too atheistic. Jews are too. As Harry Golden once said, Jews are like everything else except more so.
I agree with all of that.
Yeah. But of course that's all descriptive.
Right.
But to make that an argument against Jews, that Jews are so good at having gay rights that they must be bad. Because nothing the Jews can do can be good.
You know, there are things that can be done, and I think that that's important that we kind of focus on it. There are organizations in the United States who have not put the kind of power behind this BDS that they should have, like the Anti-Defamation League, like AJC. They should have done it 10 years ago, and they're not doing it today. If you look at the danger in America today for Jews, it starts at the universities. All of these kids that are graduating, one day, many of them will be in Congress. And they're going to be senators, they're going to be members of the House. And that's a danger, not only for Israel, it's a danger for all of you out here. Because the word Jew is associated with Israel. And so you think that you're free and clear, and that Israel is going to go down the drain and it's not going to affect you, you're 100% wrong.
I'll give you, I think, the first manifestation of how what's going on campuses affected Congress. And for me, this was so personal. And that is when several of my friends in Congress, Senator Elizabeth Warren, who's my colleague for 25 years, Senator Alan Franken, refused to come and listen to Benjamin Netanyahu make the case against the Iran deal. And I announced then, publicly, that for me that was a red line. I called Elizabeth Warren. I called Alan Franken. I left messages. I spoke to Elizabeth personally. I said, you can never again ask for my support. If you won't come and even listen to the Prime Minister of Israel, you can disagree with him. You can have a press conference afterwards. But if you won't come and listen, you can never get my support. Now, I have to tell you that Bernie Sanders did not go and listen. He walked out also. And for me, that's a red line. I like him. He grew up in Brooklyn. He was at Brooklyn College right after me. But I could never support anybody who would not come and listen to the Prime Minister of Israel. And for me, usually Congress is very supportive of Israel. But many Jewish congressmen, Jan Schakowsky from Chicago, wouldn't listen to Benjamin Netanyahu. And Franklin was Jewish, and others. So that was the first creeping manifestation of anti-Israel. Now they had an excuse. Oh, maybe he shouldn't have come because he was invited not by the president, but by the Speaker of the House. What a dumb constitutional argument. It suggests that the executive has more power than the legislature. We have a tripartite system of justice. If the president wants to invite somebody, he doesn't have to have the permission of Congress. If Congress wants to invite somebody, they don't have to have the permission of the president. And he was absolutely right to accept that invitation. He asked me to sit next to his wife. I was honored to sit next to Sarah, and he made one of the best speeches I have ever heard made in any forum in the United States. And he changed minds. I know he changed minds, because I spoke to several Democrat, liberal friends of mine who changed their views, having heard his expression. So that was another form of political correctness. We don't want to hear Netanyahu's speech. We're going to walk out. We don't care what he said. We're not going to listen. And that's just wrong.
Now, I want to point out, I want you to think about this for a minute. What is the impact on the young Jewish students who are going to campus? We see this pressure, we see the pressures, we see the political correctness, we see the anti-Israel. What is going on in the minds of a young Jew today who's going to campus? What is the impact of this negativity? We're talking about Congress, we're talking about professors, we're talking about the overall environment. But think for a moment about what's going on in the mind of a young Jew. And I think we have to understand, and to me this is the most serious issue of all, is that there is a direct line from the anti-Israel rhetoric and pressure that's happening on campus to assimilation. There's a straight line, because if a Jew can't be proud of Israel, then he's not proud of himself as a Jew, then he's not feeling very good about being Jewish, and he starts to hide his Jewishness. He starts to just ignore that part of himself. And I think that's the most challenging thing that we have to face.
Well, we have to talk about solutions. I mean, what are the solutions? We can sit here like the Jews and say things are bad. No, things aren't bad. They're worse. No, they're worse. I can tell you a story that's worse than that. We can do that all night. Now, what are we going to do about it? I think there are solutions out there. For instance, birthright is a solution. Those of you who don't give money to birthright, I want to tell you right now, you're making a major, major mistake. We send, how many do we spend a year now? 45,000. If we sent 100,000 kids a year to birthright, you would have 100,000 kids. Out of 100,000, you have 90,000 that would go back to the universities and fight for Israel because they know it's right. So let's talk about what you can do. I would say that many of you don't support birthright. Many of you in this room have a lot of money. You have to spend it. You can't take it with you. You can't leave it all with the children. And they're all anti-Semites. Why would you leave it with them? So there are organizations like this organization is a wonderful organization. It's a great organization. They're fighting the fight. Birthright is fighting the fight. Hillel on many campuses is fighting the fight. And you have to get ADL and you have to get HAC off their fat rear ends and start to fight the fight. They're spending a lot of money on Islamophobia, and they're not spending it on the problem on the universities. And I take great exception to that. I recently saw an ad that went out, and one of the, it was ADL on it, it was AJC on it, and it had CARE on it, and it had for Palestinian injustice, all talking about Islamophobia. When AJC and ADL start getting into bed with CARE, we know we have a serious problem. And so what can you do about it? Well, start talking to these organizations. You give them money. Now it's start to say, hey, listen, it's time that you really started going after the situation of where we really need the money. And I think that that's part of it. Birthright is certainly that. ADL, AGC, all these Jewish organizations, Hillel, we know we have to support on campuses.
Well, but we even have a problem there, and I'll get into that in a second. But you mentioned Jews complaining about things are bad. You know, the Israeli definition of who is a pessimist is an optimist. The pessimist is the person who says, things are so bad they can't get worse. The optimist says, yes, they can. And so I want to be a different kind of an optimist. We left out one thing that's going on campuses today, and it's a very interesting and subtle phenomenon. So now there are some organizations on campus that allow you to be interested in Israel without being pro-Israel. And J Street is the leading organization like that. It gives students kind of legitimacy to say, hey, you know, I'm interested in Israel, I'm critical of Israel, I'll join J Street, and I'll get invited to dinners, and they say they're pro-Israel, they say they're anti-BDS, but they won't invite me to speak at any of their events, but they will invite pro-BDS speakers to speak. They demand an open Hillel, but J Street is totally closed. They will not allow Erwin Kalla, Elie Wiesel, me, any moderate, and you know, I might be out of sync with many of you in this room. I am a strong supporter of the two-state solution. I am not happy about Israel's settlement policy. I am a liberal when it comes to Israel, and yet I am excluded from J Street. They won't let me speak to them. I am called a Zio-fascist on campuses. On campuses, Noam Chomsky is regarded as a centrist, and I'm regarded as right-wing. You know, I'm a liberal Democrat who supports all the liberal values and everything. As I said, probably out of sync with some of you in this audience, I'm actually writing a new book called Why I Left the Left But Couldn't Join the Right. And my argument in the book is that, you know, I believe in a woman's right to choose abortion, I believe in gay rights, I believe in separation of church and state, I believe in gun control, I believe in health care, I believe in many of the domestic aspects of the liberal program, the Democratic Party, but I cannot support their foreign policy.
Yeah, but I believe all of that, but I'm still Republican. So
no, I say in my new book, it's very easy if you, incline toward that view, that's easy. Or if you're a Democrat who doesn't care about Israel, it's easy. But if you're a Democrat who cares deeply about Israel, it's complicated. It's very, very difficult. And when I make that point, I get a lot of people, probably some of you, who come over to me afterward and say, you know, that's really the way I think. Now, your view is a very reasonable one, is that you think the foreign policy issues are more important, where you disagree, where you agree with the Republicans, disagree with the Democrats, are more important than some of the domestic issues, because you think the domestic issues are settled.
No, I think that women have a right to abortion. I really do. And so I'm a liberal Republican. And
you're the only one.
No. How many in here agree with me?
So who are you guys going to vote for? You're liberal Republicans. Ted Cruz, Donald Trump, Hillary Clinton. This is not about politics. I told you I'm out of sync with many of you. The only point I want to make is, like me or not like me, I'm a liberal Democrat. I'm a liberal when it comes to Israel, and yet I am regarded as a pariah on college campuses because of my views as a liberal centrist. That's the point I'm trying to make. I was only using my political affiliation as an illustration of that.
Alan, there's another way to go.
And I don't know who I'm going to vote for in this election.
Alan, there's another way to go on, again, improving the situation on divestiture, and that is state constitutions. You're working with it. We're working together, actually, believe it or not.
Yeah.
And no, this is very serious stuff, because I think there are about 13 states that have already passed laws.
Right, and we're trying to get every state to pass.
And if we get every state in the union that passes an anti-BDS movement, you will stop it dead. And that'll be the end of it, trust me. The other thing is the Congress of the United States.
Right.
There's already a bill.
Yeah.
Now, but again, it goes back to the administration, whether they enforce it. There was a bill passed years ago.
Yes, and there's law in the books now against secondary boycotts and that kind of thing. Now, that only deals with the divestment. it doesn't deal with academic boycotts, because academic boycotts are much harder because they're regarded as part of academic freedom. So it's much more difficult. We've been trying to draft legislation. Look, there's legislation, there's lawsuits. In England, we won a lawsuit. We were able to prove that the unions, which were seeking to boycott Israel, were acting ultra-virus, that the union constitutions didn't permit them to get involved in political issues. They could only get involved in issues that support their workers and their teachers, so we got that thrown out. There's a group in Israel that should be supported called Sherut Hadin, which works very carefully on legal strategies to try to defeat BDS and other anti-Israel movements. The point is, we have so many weapons available to us. You know, people say Jews control the media. I wish we did. Unfortunately, we have no influence in the New York Times. They say, you know, the Jews do this and do that, have so much power. Let's use it. Let's use our power. Let's not be embarrassed. You know, when they wrote a book called The Jewish Lobby, Mearsheimer and Walls, I was the only person who supported that book. I said, hey, great, we're strong, we're powerful. Let people be afraid of us. Let people make sure that they understand that there are consequences for going against Israel. I have no fear of being regarded as too strong. I have great fear of being regarded as too weak.
I just wanted to bring up also another solution. I think I agree with Bernie. We have to think about what can be done. What can be done to make this situation improve? And one of them is education in the high schools. I think that once our grandchildren, our children end up in campus, and if they are not properly prepared, they get hit with the situation, it is a very difficult situation for them to deal with. And I think there we have a tremendous amount of latitude to make an impact. And that is certainly Jerusalem U is we have curriculum on Israel education that's in all the high schools. But just to give you an idea of what's going on, this is another Brandeis study. And I will also do final words right after this and close it up for the evening. They did a study on pre-birthright applicants. In other words, people who applied for a birthright. What is their level of Israel literacy? They asked them 90 questions. They asked about 1,000 students. What was their level of understanding about Israel? Questions like the following. Can you name the name of the Israeli parliament? Is it the Kotel, the Knesset, or Shawarma? Questions along those lines. And the results for people who had not gone to day school was 42% correct. Scarier even than that was that those who did go to day school, they were up to 47%. Only 5% better.
Future of America.
Yeah, so yes, that's like you were saying at the beginning. So I think that a lot has to be done on the high school level so that by the time the Jewish students end up on campus, they're much better educated.
No, I agree completely, and the level of ignorance is appalling. When I did my debate at Oxford, I was only given 10 minutes to do my opening debate against BDS. I decided to take 5 of those minutes simply to give a history of how Israel got established. I wanted to make the point that no country in history has a more valid birth certificate than Israel. No country has ever been more legally established. It was established, the Balfour Declaration, 1917. The vote of the League of Nations, acceptance by France, acceptance by the United States, a variety of treaties. The treaties, you go down the list. Israel gets established by the partition into a Jewish state and an Arab state in 1947. 1948, the division comes into effect. No country in history, not the United States, which started by a violent revolution, certainly not Russia, certainly not England, certainly you can't find another country that has a more legitimate birth certificate, and yet you see these absurd and idiotic claims on campus that the very establishment of Israel was a violation of law. If the Palestinians had simply accepted the 48 partition, there'd be no refugee problem. Israel would be a smaller state, but a more secure state. The Nakba, which is called the catastrophe, was a self-inflicted wound. People just don't remember it. They don't remember 67. They don't remember 73. And it's very important to spend at least 5 minutes educating the students on that. They get that when they go to birthright. I see it. I see the birthright experience and how it impacts my students at Harvard. What I did as a result of that is I established my own little birthright, opposite birthright program at Harvard, and every spring vacation, I would take 80 or 90 Harvard Law School students, primarily not Jewish, the leaders of the black community, the leaders of the Asian community, the leaders of the Latino community, the leaders of the gay community, the leaders, you name it, and I would take them to Israel for a 10-day trip. I'd get them to meet the Prime Minister, the Supreme Court justices. Guess what the first place I took them to? Where do you think the first place I took non-Jewish Harvard future leaders, every time I see this group I say, where do you think I took them? You won't guess. I took them to Ramallah. Why did I take them to Ramallah? Because they all have heard that the Palestinians are living a life of poverty, of oppression. They're all living in camps. You go to Ramallah, it's indistinguishable from Jerusalem, except it's a little prettier. Fantastic restaurants, high-tech stores, fancy cars, the Palestinian Authority. I take them into the Palestinian Authority. I meet the leaders, and they say, everything we've heard about Israel's oppression of the Palestinians is wrong. We've seen it with our own eyes. Then I take them to the Kotel. Then I take them to the Knesset. Then I take them to the terror tunnels. Then I take them to the Golan. But they see Ramallah first and they say, we've been lied to. We've been misled. I take them to Bethlehem and they say, we've been misled. That it's just not true what they're hearing about what's going on the West Bank. And so education is crucially important. And when I take these students back, I've had black students who said to me, can we work in Israel this summer? We've become Zionists. We want to join up. Where do we sign up? And I say, you don't have to sign up. All you have to do is follow your conscience. And you get people like that woman there who was in the film from New Orleans University, who was such a great spokesman for Israel, or Colonel Kemp, Major Kemp, who's not Jewish. We need the support of Christians. We need evangelicals to support us. One more story, and it's a little bit self-serving, but I have to tell it. And here's the story. An Arab man calls me one day, and he says, I have to tell you a story. He said, I was a jihadist. I was born in Pakistan, I lived in London, and I was training to go on jihad. And I decided that before I went on jihad and gave up my life, I want to read what I'm giving up my life for. So we went to Waterstone in London, and he started buying a bunch of books about the Palestinian conflict, all anti-Israel books. Then he saw a book on a shelf called The Case for Israel, my book. And he said, well, I'm going to read this, and I'm going to attack it. And he read it. And he said, you know, there's some interesting things in there. I don't know if it's true or not. And so he went to Israel. And he saw for himself. He had trouble. Let me tell you, getting into Israel when you're a jihadist is not so easy. But it took 8 hours of interrogation by the Israeli police, and they let him in. And he stayed there, and he studied, and he now goes all over the world making the case for Israel. He is a strident Zionist. He learned himself, not from my book. The book stimulated him, but he went there and he learned for himself. People are educable. People can learn. There are good and decent people out there. It's our job to give them the resources to come to the conclusions that we know are just.
I have to correct you on one thing. That student that Alan was talking about, you got the story almost completely right. Except he's a British. He was a British jihadi. And I had him at my Shabbat table.
Right? He's British from Pakistan.
Yes.
Yeah,
and the rest of the story, all great. And the problem is, you said we need non-Jews who were going to stand up for us, but unfortunately he became such a Muslim Zionist that I think he's now converting to be Jewish.
I know he had a Jewish girlfriend.
Oh, is he in for trouble? This is not a smart Muslim. Anyway, there's one last thing. That we don't do anything with the evangelicals. Now, when you go in the universities and you have these demonstrations in the universities, you know how many evangelicals are on these universities that would join with the Jews? For some reason, many Jews think that the evangelicals are evil people. They really are. If you went to this audience, I'll bet you would find 50% of this audience believes that. They think that they have to convert us in order to get Jerusalem back, in order for Jesus to come back. It's not true. It really is not true. They do not believe that. And they are the best friends of Israel. And when these kids, every one of these kids that are outnumbered 5 to 1, 10 to 1, joined up with the evangelicals, it would be even odds, and it makes it a lot easier for them, and they would have much more Jewish kids joining up with them.
I agree completely, and by the way, many of the evangelicals are very understanding. When I speak at evangelical universities, and I've spoken at Liberty University, where Donald Trump is speaking today, I spoke at the invitation of Jerry Falwell, I would start my speech by saying, look, we're not going to agree on gay rights. We're not going to agree on a woman's right to choose abortion. We're not going to agree on many other issues. We're going to agree on Israel. And we're going to have an arm's length relationship on the other issues, the way friends do. You will criticize me, I will criticize you, but let's work together on the things that we agree on. That's my understanding with Ted Cruz, who was my former student. I say, Ted, you and I will never agree on these other issues, but we will agree on Israel. And I have said, Ted Cruz is one of the smartest students I had at Harvard Law School. And I work closely with evangelicals. I work closely with every other group that is prepared to support Israel. And it's very important to build those bridges and not to be afraid. Look, Judaism has nothing to fear from voluntary conversion. I don't know any Jew who has ever voluntarily converted to Christianity other than for marriage reasons or other reasons. In the old days, Jews had to convert. There's a great professor at Leningrad University, or St. Petersburg University, who was asked once, did you convert out of principle? He converted from being Jewish to being Russian Orthodox. He says, yes, I converted out of principle. The principle was, I'd rather be a professor at St. Petersburg than a Malamed in Chlor. And that was the reason Jews converted in those days. Today, Jews don't have to convert. As you said, assimilation. When I was growing up, people say, my generation is wonderful, we all married Jews. I married a wonderful Jewish woman. We all married Jews. Of course we all married Jews. Nobody else wanted to marry us. Today, everybody wants to marry a Jew, except apparently another Jew. And so we are fighting this battle of assimilation.
It's not good for Home Depot, because when they marry a Gentile, they don't give the diamonds anymore. They used to give, they used to give us a chainsaw. They would give, a Black & Decker tool. And now they have to give diamonds. Once they marry a Jewish girl, they're dead in the water. I have to tell you one story. I want you to listen carefully, because you're going to use this story forever, but you have to give me credit for it, okay? Always. And that is the story of a Jew that prayed at the wall for 65 years, 5 times a day. Rain, winter, summer, sleet, rocks coming down, bullets flying. This guy was at the wall 5 times a day. And the New York Times heard about it, and they sent a reporter over. And he went over and interviewed this guy. He was old, disheveled, his beard, he was decrepit and dirty, filthy, but he's out there 5 days a week and davening every day. And he said, is it true that you do that? He says, oh yeah. He said, I've been out here, they've been throwing stones on me. He said, my God, you've been doing this for 65 years? He said, what do you pray for? He says, well, first of all, I pray for health for my family. I pray that my children are going to grow up well. Then I pray that the Arabs and the Israelis and the Jews and the Christians will get together and they will work together and they will love each other and the world will be a better world. And then he says, well, my God, well, how do you feel about it? He says, it's like talking to a wall.
Okay, so my mother had a variation of that story. Same Jew, prays every day, 5 times a day. And the New York Times asked him, what are you praying for? He says, I am so disappointed. Every day I just pray for one thing, to win the lottery. And finally he's on his deathbed and he says, God, I prayed all this time to win the lottery. I didn't win. God says, help me a little, buy a ticket. So we're here to buy a ticket. And we have to buy a ticket. We have to help God. We have to join together and work, and each of us do our contribution.
And here are a few things you can do.